Hello, guys. I'm George,
And I'm Alexa. Hey.
and today we're gonna react to World War II Oversimplified Part 2. Let's see where the story left off from last time, and let's see how maybe this time we'll see how the World War II ended.
I
Yeah,
supposed to
we
because
know
they
how
are.
that ended, and it's not a spoiler. Yeah, but let's see a fast recap of story behind World War II.
And in a funny way.
Yeah, in a funny way.
Apparently.
Yeah, they should teach it like this in history class. I don't think in school.
But
You
they.
don't need to remember all the dates, just how stupid some people were.
Yes, but I don't think. At least our professors from the Romanian system wouldn't have. This is 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is not in
For
hour.
1 year of class of history.
Yeah. It doesn't fit the programma. I don't
Yeah.
know how it. Programma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
School, forgot how it is called. So yeah, the history classes
It's
will
too
be
short.
a lot more fun and shorter. You don't need to learn all the dates and
Yes, that was actually my
Yeah.
big frustration from the history because everything was the years and my memory is not good with numbers
Yeah,
at
but
all. I can remember that.
I remember the dates. It doesn't help me in any way, just to brag sometimes to somebody who knows when World War II started or ended or
I mean, I
our
know the
dates
year, but
for our
year,
country. But I know the independence of America, year of independence.
4th of July, who doesn't know?
Yeah, the year.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we don't need
Please
all
don't
the
blame me,
dates,
guys. I'm not with the dates.
especially the antiquity dates. Yeah, this is more recent history.
But anyway, don't.
You don't know the year when the Rome was founded.
1000.
1000, yeah, really.
101.
So let's start. Let's start watching.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck,
Moldavia.
Dude, annexing part of Romania wasn't a war. It was just an ultimatum. He said, give us Bessarabia or we'll attack. And we said, okay.
Take it.
Yeah, take it. So they didn't fire a shot to get Bessarabia.
heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other...
We joined because we thought that we will get back the part that we lost to the Russians. And we had the government that
But then
a military government actually.
there's not a part of the USSR, right?
No, not USSR doesn't exist yet.
Oh, sorry, told you.
Yeah,
My history is really bad.
but no. It exists. Yeah, it exists. So we joined with Nazi Germany because we wanted back our land that we lost to the Russians. And we thought that maybe Hitler will be indulging because we fight again, beside him, and he will give us back
Like
the
he
land we
care.
lost and the land that we lost to the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Like he cared.
Yeah, like
the other
he
countries
cared.
from deciding to join
Yeah.
the Allies. Specifically,
He didn't break his promises with Czechoslovakia or Poland. No.
Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America.
no.
When war first broke out, American public opinion
Yeah,
was
no.
strongly against joining
Still
in.
believe.
In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons."
Please.
America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pikecrete. You take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pikecrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pikecrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room.
What?
Then they tried to make a pikecrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea.
What?
Oh my God, yeah, we
What
tried to make
What's that?
sawdust mixed with ice. Frozen
In the
sawdust.
end, Alan Turing and his team of
What? Again, what was the use for that?
They tried to make a ship because it was harder.
The
It was
metal.
more resistant to projectiles than metal, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, but it actually melts. So,
Oh.
no, it is. If you make it thick enough, but really make a ship
But-
out of sawdust and ice.
codebreakers cracked
God,
Germany's
it's
Enigma
horrible.
code, and the
Yeah, this
Sorry.
was the Enigma machine. Was an incredible
Ah,
discovery.
U-boats gradually
still
became
don't know
less
how
and
it
less of a
works.
threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt.
know it
Hey,
was
that was pretty
broke
easy.
somehow,
So they
but-
kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece. So either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The
Oh.
British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply
8
line. Despite
weeks?
having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers
cannot
of Russian
believe the
troops.
tactics.
250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege.
All the victims of World War II were in this battle. Almost. The majority of the victims. were in
From
this
both
battle.
sides, I think,
from,
right?
From Germany and Russia, yeah. The numbers are incredible. I cannot think how could you be a general and brag about you lost, 5 million soldiers, something like that. The numbers are insane.
It's like
That would last an insufferable
right?
4 years.
Bit
The invasion of Russia had been
Sheer
Hitler's
will.
main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would
I
give up
think I
before
remember
winter, but they kept fighting.
of
His
this
commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." We're
See
It's
how
fine,
that
keep
cold it
going.
is, yeah. I think the Russians here.
How you can keep
won
going if you...
because they were primitive. Because literally machine didn't work in that cold.
That's what I'm saying. How you keep going when it
Yeah.
literally doesn't go. I mean,
He was pressured, that's why.
having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. perfectly normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match.
No, he
Yeah.
literally.
He didn't care. He moved his industrial factories to the east.
No, but the thing that is going with the head
Yeah,
in
in
the
the
sand
sand.
finally go out.
Oh yeah. There were some big mistakes there, and they did survive
funny, though.
because the U.S. gave them weapons.
The
That's it.
Germans.
To Russians.
Oh, to
Russia-
Russians.
Yeah, made an alliance with Germany to invade Poland, and when Russia was attacked by Germany, the U.S. gave them weapons and UK.
Wait.
Yeah,
Which part then? The Russians?
yeah, to the Russians. Yeah,
Only Russians.
They supplied to the Russians weapons and blankets and equipment.
Oh, so they are friends. Friends back then.
Yeah. Well. What did you think?
Politic.
Germany and Russia made the pact, but Russia was neutral, let's say it. It had the expansionary visions, but the
Politics
West
sucks.
didn't say anything about that. So that was interesting.
Politics.
Actually, two countries started invading. Germany with Italy and Japan, one alliance. They start invading Europe and Africa and Pacific, and Russia was invading the other countries. Yeah,
So
really
they are
interesting.
like
Yeah.
to-
They didn't try to beat the Nazis. No, they were invading other countries.
Oh dear.
So and they are considered to be the ones that we in the East consider that Russia is the one that ended the war, but it's not actually what that was.
They were
I think,
now being pushed
mostly
back. They had no
just
choice but to
Russia
dig in
think
and wait for winter to end.
They ended the war. Mostly Russian. Only Russia.
Well, it was
Think-
a
yeah.
lot of propaganda here too,
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, but we found out the truth. What happened?
Yes,
Germany's
after the
victories were
democracy,
staggering,
yes.
and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was.
Oh, the
On December
kamikaze.
7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to
Oh,
declare
so
war
they
on
were
Japan,
better in
and so
the
did Churchill.
flying part.
Hitler then declared
Yeah.
war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese
was
victory, but they
stupid.
didn't attack any of
Yeah.
the naval repair
Sorry.
yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the
Yeah,
Japanese
that-
were able
that
to
was
begin
a
their
weird
conquest.
attack,
They
so-
took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to
Wow.
Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been
Wow.
based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
They-
For now, though,
They-
in
True
all
power.
occupied nations,
They
the
done some
people
kind of
suffered. Persecution,
blitzkrieg
forced
too?
labor, harsh
Yeah,
punishments for
they-
any
they
who
did
spoke
that,
out
yeah.
against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other
think
unwanted
it's the
groups
right
and
term, right?
individuals. In particular,
if it
millions of
happened
Jewish people would
quickly,
suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance.
If it happened quickly, it's not a kind of
Yeah, it's a
blitzkrieg.
blitzkrieg. Yeah, see now the Holocaust is starting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Resistance
was
movements
weird.
rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people
You
held out
don't
for
give
hope,
it
and hope
resources.
was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward, but this time he switched up his strategy.
Descărcați aplicația Notino și încercați produse de machiaj online direct pe propria piele.
It's 2023. Are you going to wait
Oh my
till
God, sorry for
2024,
the commercials.
2025, maybe even 2026 before you
He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward.
That
For
visual,
Stalin,
though,
it was a
sorry.
resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the
Because they conquer so much area, they couldn't hold the front line. You have to defend the front line. If it's thousands of miles of kilometers, not
And
miles,
islands.
kilometers, and islands, and it's hard to defend.
There are a lot of
Solomon Islands and New
here.
Guinea, they began to realize they were not
Especially
invincible.
America was a
With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. "All right," said the Americans, "we'll do it your way." Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. "All right," said the Americans, "let's do it our way as well." Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before, invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D.
were
Eisenhower,
nicer.
the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of
So
life,
they can't
particularly at
discover
Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the
and
German
they
7th
circled
Army
again.
in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end. And the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the
I
more
think
ferocious
they
the
have
resistance
this
became. In
mentality
February
to
1945, the Americans captured the island of
Right
Iwo
now.
Jima, and an intense firebombing
Yeah.
campaign of Japan's
I don't
wooden
know if
cities
I'm right or
began.
not.
The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the
I'm not
Netherlands,
sure.
but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships.
Oh,
The
that's
citizens
what
of
the kamikaze-
Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima. Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for
I
the
don't
Allies,
even
it
want to
achieved
think
their main
about it,
aim.
to be
In
honest.
September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage.
The
After
decision
6
was
years, war was finally over. The Allies
They said that they used the atomic bombs because they wanted to end the war faster. Because if they attack mainland Japan, they will have to fight. The Japanese people will fight to the last man. So it would be a very long battle with a lot of
Kind of makes
death
sense, but
and
you killed, I don't know how
yeah, but
many people's, millions of
maybe
people's.
that thing ended the war, and maybe that saved more lives than actually going for all Japan. So interesting decision. But the other part that Churchill wanted to show Stalin the power, and they remember the conference of Yalta when they split Europe in two. Yeah, and Italy uh, uh, joined the Allies and fought with Nazi Germany. Romania joined the Allies and fought next to the Russian, but we didn't get.
What we promised.
Yep. So
Also,
occupied Japan
that
for 8
iconic
years.
picture.
The Emperor was allowed to
Churchill
keep his position, but General
was
MacArthur
at
made sure
fault
this picture was
because-
printed in the Japanese
because East Europe wasn't that important to the Allies.
press to display to the
We
Japanese
never
people that their
won.
emperor was not the divine,
Or
powerful being they had
And we
believed.
had
Germany
40
was
years
divided
of
between
communism.
America, the UK,
Communism.
France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers
They
with two
created
very
two
different
major
ideologies had
superpowers.
come out.
Why would you create this? Why would you want to create this? I don't understand.
Because
Why
you can.
would you want to create this?
You can.
Yeah, because you
Not
can.
victorious, and the tension
The
between the two of them
Warsaw Pact.
would create a new kind of war,
Warsaw Pact.
a very, very cold one.
Cold War.
Yeah, it started
Wow, Churchill,
another
that
war.
looks just like me. And your app is doing really well. And this quesadilla you made is...
Yeah.
Said yeah.
And the war actually didn't end the war, it just started another war. It wasn't really a war, Cold War, but they had a lot of crises, a lot of
And I
very
see-
tense situations.
Well, maybe because it's not about the Holocaust, it's about the World War II in general. But I see in this video in particular, it wasn't exactly important thing.
No, because it wasn't actually about the war. That's why. It's about the battles, the strategies, not the.
Anyway, the strategies were mind blowing. I mean, from my point
The
of view.
Blitzkrieg tactics was a very good battle tactics. You cannot argue with that. Was a
I
very
know,
good
but
tactics.
the way they thought, the way they, I don't know. I mean, it was just
Weird, yeah.
kind of awesome strategy, kind of like
Yeah, some were brilliant.
chess in a good in I don't know how to explain it. Like chess when you take checkmate,
Yeah,
mate.
then it's
You know, I mean,
yeah, it's some
I hope it
thing
makes
like
sense.
chess.
Sorry
Yeah.
if it doesn't.
Um.
Is that
Yeah, that's what.
I think it's
No,
not.
it's the end. It's just a commercial. I
Ah,
think, yeah.
okay.
So next time we'll watch more about these videos. Really interesting and curious to see. I saw something about the American Civil War. That's interesting because we don't know anything about that. So that will be really interesting. The North versus South. Then the only thing I know is Yankee Doodle.
Okay.
Bugs Bunny. So, and I think Colt invented the pistol, and Gatling
And
the
you know
machine gun.
that how it's called, that painting with the woman.
Yeah. That will be interesting to watch, to see. Hope you liked our videos. Like and subscribe, please. This will really
Don't
help us.
forget to comment.
Yeah, thank you for all the comments and the likes. It really encourages us to do
Do
these
more.
videos. Yeah, to do videos because we're not actually extroverts, as you say. So it's
And also try to be better entertainers.
yeah, we're trying to get used to the cameras. So see you next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.